This is a 2019 Subaru Ascent, and it is a midsize SUV from Subaru. Finally, the Ford Explorer came out 25 years ago. The Honda Pilot came out 15 years ago, and it's taken all that time for Subaru to put together a decent three-row family SUV. But now it's finally here, and it's more than just decent. First, a little background. Now, the family SUV segment started to heat up in the 1990s with the Ford Explorer, and it really started to grow more popular in the 2000s with the Honda Pilot and the Toyota Highlander, the Mazda CX-9, and many others. Subaru took their first shot at a mid-size three-row family SUV in 2006 with a vehicle that was inexplicably named the B9 Tribeca, and which was horribly bizarre looking with a giant gaping mouth in front that looked like it was surrounded by wings. They eventually restyled the B9 Tribeca, and they named it just the Tribeca, but the damage was done. It was a failure, and Subaru canceled it after the 2014 model year. It took Subaru 4 more years to build up the courage to re-enter the midsize SUV segment, and this is the model they've chosen to do it with, the Ascent, and it seems fairly reasonable. Nothing weird, nothing controversial, nothing that will make consumers recoil in disgust. I've borrowed this Ascent from Subaru Orange Coast here in Orange County, California, where they say Ascents are flying out of the showrooms. It is an incredibly popular car. They're selling every one they get in. It seems Subaru finally has a midsize SUV hit on its hands, and today we're going to find out why. First, a quick overview. The Ascent is a three-row crossover, and it comes standard with all-wheel drive, unlike basically everything else in this segment. It's powered by a 260 horsepower turbocharged four-cylinder, and the only transmission is a CVT automatic. The Ascent starts around $35,000. This is an upscale limited model, but if you get the top-of-the-line touring version, that starts at $46,000 and goes from there with options, making the Ascent the most expensive Subaru ever. So today I'm going to take you on a tour of the Ascent, and I'm going to show you all the quirks and features of Subaru's newest model. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the Ascent, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've also compiled a list of the most expensive SUVs currently listed for sale on AutoTrader. Now I'm going to start the quirks and features by trying to verify a claim that Subaru has made in a lot of marketing materials for this car, and that is the fact that the Ascent has 19 cup holders. Now let's check it out. So you start on the door panel. On the driver's side you have 2. That's 2. On the passenger side front door panel, you have 2 more, that's 4. In the middle of the front seats, you have 2 more, and that's 6. Then we go to the back seats. On the rear door on the driver's side, you have 2 more, you're up to 8. And on the rear door on the passenger side, you have 2 more, and now you're up to 10. Then there's 1 more in each individual rear door near the top. That's 11 and 12. You open a little cubby behind the center console in the second row of seats, and there are 2 more, and now you're up to 14. So we've covered the first 2 rows, and we got 14 cup holders, and you're thinking, well, how could this possibly end at 19? How could they have an odd number left to go? You go into the third row, and indeed, there is an odd number. On the passenger side, there are 3 cup holders. On the driver's side, there are only 2 cup holders, so one of the rear passengers can merely carry around 2 drinks while the other one gets bathed in liquid luxury with 3 drinks. But either way, I can verify there are 19 cup holders in this vehicle, which frankly is about 13 more than I would imagine you'd actually need, but it has it. Now next up, this is a Subaru. They're known for practicality, simplicity, and it's also a family crossover, so you would think it wouldn't really be all that quirky, and really it isn't, but I have found a few items worth noting. One is the fact that I was poking around this car and I discovered hidden in a little compartment in the center there is a pen and pad that says Subaru on it. I just kind of figured it was some giveaway thing, but actually it's a pen and pad that says the following on the inside. In the next few weeks, you will become more acclimated with your new vehicle. During this time, you may have additional comments or concerns you would like to review with us. Please use this journal to record any questions you might have. In other words, as you're sort of getting acclimated to all the new technology and whatever, you might have some questions, so they give you a little journal to jot it down if you're confused about something. That is actually a really good idea. And this is nowhere near the most technically complicated car I've reviewed. Frankly, that's something that other automakers ought to consider doing too. Next up, another interesting quirk in this car. If you look at the mirrors, the outside mirrors, you will see that there is a little Subaru logo that is lit up. Now, initially I thought that was the blind spot monitor. I was thinking, how cool, the blind spot monitor, when it blinks to let you know a car's in your blind spot, it has the Subaru logo. But actually, the blind spot monitor is located here on the edge of the mirror, closer to the interior of the car. So what exactly is this thing? Well, it turns out it's an approach light. As you walk up to the car, if you unlock the doors, that light turns on, I guess to help you find your car in a parking lot. Yours will be the one with the mirrors that are lit up. It's very strange. When you close the door, the light turns off, and then you drive around and just the Subaru logo is sort of sitting there in your mirror. But when you open the door again, the light turns back on. Another interesting lighting item in the Ascent is in the sun visors. Put the sun visor down, pretty standard sun visor. But then you look at the sun visor mirror lights and they're like weirdly complicated. I don't know why they couldn't just like stick a light in here like everyone else. They have to have all these weird lines running through them, but that's what they chose to do. Now, next up, if you take sort of a general view of the interior of this car, you'll see there's this off-white kind of contrasting piece of leather below the dashboard. Now, interestingly, that forms a storage cubby over on the left of the steering wheel. It has like a little place where you could put, I don't know, coins or something else that might be loose that you want access to the left of the wheel, where you can easily grab it, and that's pretty cool. And interestingly, it actually forms the same thing over on the right, on the passenger side. Obviously, this car has a glove box where you can put stuff if you want it out of sight, but above that and above the little off-white piece of trim, there is this little storage cubby where you can store loose items, pens, whatever, in case you want easy access to them without opening the glove box. Next up, moving into the center, is a button that says X mode. So obviously, I'm like, what is that? I looked up X mode, and it's Subaru's literature, and it says the following: when X mode is activated, electronic control of the engine, transmission, all-wheel drive system, brakes, vehicle dynamic system, and other critical components is optimized. You know, that's good, but I kind of want that stuff optimized just generally, like when I'm just driving around. Be nice if the brakes were optimized, like when I'm cruising around. But anyway, you put on X mode. It's supposed to be for like slippery roads or ice or rough roads if you're off-roading your Ascent. Now, another interesting item in the middle, if you look closely, you can see that the center console cover is obviously the armrest for the driver and passenger seat, but the passenger armrest is longer by like a ½ inch. What's the deal, Subaru? Why does the passenger get more armrest room? Come on! That seems unfair. Next up, here's an interesting feature in the overhead center console near the rear view mirror. If you push a little plastic piece in the center, it pops down and reveals a sunglasses holder. That's not unusual. Almost all cars have that. The weird thing is, if you kind of set it in the middle setting, it'll click into place, and then it's a mirror, and you can use the mirror to look at all of the passengers in your car. This isn't quite the Honda Odyssey camera that monitors the rear seat passengers, but it's close enough if you want to monitor what your kids are doing in the back without having to turn around. Now, next up, since we're in this area, we might as well talk about EyeSight. Now, EyeSight is really cool. It's Subaru's sort of group of safety technology. It includes blind spot monitoring, forward collision, auto braking. It's basically every modern safety feature you could want. Now, EyeSight functions using a couple of cameras located up here, sort of above the rear view mirror. Obviously, it's really important for the cameras to be able to see to do what they do, so there's a little don't touch warning up there, because if you smudge the cameras with your hands even a little bit, apparently they become inactive and you have to clean them. Now, in addition to being just a general group of good and important safety features, EyeSight has a couple of interesting quirks that are very much worth pointing out. One of which is called Lead Vehicle Moving Monitor. In English, here's what it does. You're sitting at a stoplight and you're texting. Now, I don't do this. I don't text at stoplights, but you do, and I know it because I'm behind you all the time. Anyway, you're sitting at a stoplight, you're texting, the car in front of you starts to go, but you're so engrossed in your phone conversation that you don't even realize. Well, the Lead Vehicle Moving Monitor in EyeSight will beep at you to let you know, hey, the guy in front of you moved. It's time for you to move also. So you can sit there and text, and you don't have to hold me up because EyeSight will let you know when the car moves, and you don't have to sit there looking like an idiot. That is a good idea. And here's an even cooler thing from EyeSight. You can choose the cruise control acceleration characteristic. You're sitting in your car and you ever felt like cruise control just isn't quick enough to get back up to speed? It's like, come on, floor it. Everybody else is going fast. Well, in this thing, you can choose between 4 different cruise control settings. You have dynamic, you have regular, you have comfort, and you have eco. And if you have it in dynamic, when the car in front of you starts to move and you're using adaptive cruise, this thing will floor it and go as fast as it can. When you have it in eco, it will go as slowly as it can in order to preserve your fuel economy. I love the idea that you can configure how fast your cruise control accelerates. That is brilliant, and I wish every car had it. Now next up, still in front, we move on to a warning label placed here on the door. It says on it, caution, if our diff temp light comes on, slow down and stop in a safe place until the light goes out. Serious rear differential damage could occur. Now that sounds like a pretty serious warning label. Fortunately, Subaru has placed it in an easy spot that will be very clear and obvious for anyone trying to figure out what that light means. Now, next we move on to the back seat, or at least the second row in the Ascent, where there are a couple of interesting items. One is the rear sunshade. It's built into the door panel in the limited model, so you can put it up and it blocks the rear window so that a baby who might be sensitive to sun is not plastered with sun. Now, for years when I was growing up, moms with little babies would like stick on sunshades in back windows, and they would get them at like Target, and that feature was only reserved for luxury sedans for some reason. Obviously, that feature makes more sense in family SUVs like this, so it's good to see that more and more family SUVs are starting to offer it. Now, our next interesting item in the back of this car is the rear heated seats. This car has rear heated seats, a nice luxury feature, but the rear heated seats only have 2 stages, 2 little lights you can choose from, whereas the front heated seats have 3 stages. Who do you think the guy is who made that decision? No, gotta limit the rear heated seats to only 2. We can't let them be too comfortable back there, not like the front people. Now, one other cool rear seat item is the fact that they move. You can easily move them so you can get into the third row, but that also has a hidden benefit. That means you can move the seat backward or forward. You can see I'm kind of smushed up against the front passenger seat. Well, check this out. I can slide it back for more legroom. Now, that's not all that unusual. If you've been in any modern family SUV, they can basically all do this. But when I grew up, the rear seats didn't move at all. They were just fixed in place, and I think that is a pretty cool little trick. Now, speaking of the seats and back and moving, you might wonder how easy it is to get into the third row of seats, especially for someone like me, since I'm not exactly small. Well, actually, it's surprisingly easy. All modern family vehicles have made it pretty easy, and this is one of the easiest of all. You just pull on a little lever right here, the seat moves forward, and then that's it. There's enough room to easily climb in back. When you're in the third row, it's worth noting there's not much particularly interesting back here. It's just a kind of an auxiliary row of seats for when they're needed, but you might be wondering why the third row has 3 cup holders on one side and 2 on the other. Well, actually, I can't quite work it out myself. There's clearly room for 3 cup holders on either side, but for some reason, Subaru decided not to do that. I honestly wonder if the Subaru marketing department thought 19 cup holders sounded a little bit more ear-catching than 20 cup holders, so they just decided to screw over one of the third row seat passengers. Then again, it doesn't matter. It's not like you'll ever have 5 or 6 drinks you'll want to be transporting in the third row cup holders. And by the way, getting out of the third row is just as easy as getting in, even for someone tall like me. Requires a little maneuvering, but you can do it. Now, next up, moving on to the cargo area. There's nothing especially interesting or unusual back here, although I will say, if you lift up the floor of the cargo area, you will see there's a little compartment that you can also lift up, and in that compartment, there is a screwdriver. And that screwdriver is not just a Phillips head screwdriver. You can flip it around, and it doubles as a flathead screwdriver because Subaru is always endlessly practical. Now, as you can see, the cargo area with the third row of seats in place is not particularly big. There is some room back here, unlike in some other cars, but there's not a lot. However, if you want to put more stuff back here, folding the third row of seats is a really easy procedure. You just pull on this little strap, push the seat forward, and then it's down. And obviously, you do the same thing on the other side, and the other seat is down, and you have a lot more cargo space. Now, if you want to get the seat back up, it is a slightly more complicated procedure. It's 2 steps instead of 1. You pull on this loop, and that brings it to here, and then you pull this loop and kind of adjust it to wherever you want the backrest to be most comfortable for your rear passengers. Now, one quirk I like with these little nylon straps, this one would just kind of be flopping around and dangling in place. So Subaru has affixed Velcro to the end of it and placed a little Velcro piece on the back of the seat so you can just Velcro it down, and then it looks flush against the seat back, and it's not bothering your cargo area or looking ugly when you open the tailgate. Now, next up, I want to move on to some of the interesting quirks of the infotainment system. This car has 3 screens. I already showed you some of the interesting configurations of the screen in the gauge cluster. There's also a screen on top of the dashboard in the middle. Interestingly, that screen can display your steering angle and your overall vehicle tilt angle, items off-roaders need, but something Ascent owners will never use. Something that Ascent owners will use, however, is the birthday feature. I showed you this in the STI Type RA video. You can program a birthday into your little top screen, and then when you turn on the vehicle on that day, it will wish you a happy birthday with whatever name you provided it. I think that is kind of ridiculous and stupid, but I have to admit I also like it, and if I had one of these, I would put my birthday in. As for the center infotainment screen itself, there are a couple of unusual features. One is the rear camera timeout feature. Basically, you put the car in reverse, the rear camera goes on. You put it back into drive, the camera goes off. But it doesn't have to. If you turn on the rear camera timeout feature, it will stay on for a number of seconds that you can choose. If, for example, you want your rear camera to stay on for 4 seconds or 5 seconds after you shift back into drive, you can do that and configure precisely how many seconds you want. It seems like an unusually configurable item, but it's there. Another interestingly configurable item in the infotainment screen is the auto headlight sensor. It's not just whether you want on or off automatic headlights. You can choose between 4 different settings, min, low, mid, and max, for how aggressive you want it to be when it starts getting dark outside. That's not incredibly unusual, but the more interesting thing is there's also a little option below where you can click a button that says wiper link. In other words, if you live in a place where by law, if you have your wipers on, your lights have to come on, you can turn that on in your infotainment system, and then you don't have to worry about it. Your lights will automatically come on when you turn on your wipers. That is a pretty cool idea. Now, next we move on to the outside. Now, in terms of the exterior styling, I find this car to be pretty nice. Nothing really to complain about. Frankly, I think it looks a little bit too much like the Honda Pilot, but other than that, I think it's a fairly reasonable, conservative, good design, and I couldn't really find any unusual or weird quirks on the outside of this car, except for the fog light housing. Take a look at the fog light housing. You have this giant C that sort of goes around the whole thing. Then you have this chrome strip right in the middle. Then you have these 3 other pieces on top and 3 other pieces on bottom. And then finally, in the very corner, tucked in, you have the fog light. I don't know why you need all this stuff just for the fog light to be in this little spot, but that's what they've chosen to do. And so that's a tour of the Subaru Ascent. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the Chiron. Nah, just kidding. First thing you realize when you drive around is that it drives like a mid-size SUV, as you'd imagine. The steering is actually reasonably spry. I never want to call a car like this sporty because it isn't. And some car journals say, well, this such and such midsize SUV is super sporty and such one isn't. And it's like, well, no, they're all about the same. But the steering feels a little bit less vague and boring than I would have expected. Flooring it. It's fine. Acceleration is good. Surprisingly good considering that it's a 4-cylinder. Obviously, it's a turbocharged 4-cylinder, 260 horsepower is nothing to sneeze at. That's what people used to be getting from V6s. But it's a fairly hefty vehicle and standard all-wheel drive. It has some weight and some size. But that was actually pretty good acceleration. I'm surprised by that. The driving position is good. You get a good commanding view. Visibility is good. The mirrors are large. There's no weird kinks in the back for screwing up blind spot or anything like that. It feels very easy to drive, which is nice. You know, I think one of the big benefits the Outback has had over its competitors for a long time, even against a lot of midsize SUVs, is that the Outback was always easier to drive than an SUV. It felt more car-like. And I'm surprised at how car-like this feels. It doesn't feel like you're driving around a large SUV. The interior materials are fine. There's a lot of plastic, but everything's very durable. I mean, it's the Subaru way, right? Like everything is simple, easily laid out, logical, but nothing looks incredibly high-end. And I think, though, that people who buy these cars, they get that. Generally speaking, I've found that people who buy midsize SUVs, the driving experience doesn't really matter all that much unless there's something negative about it that says you shouldn't buy it. Like if it's too loud, if the visibility is terrible, if it's too tight inside. And this car doesn't have any negatives. In terms of positives of the driving experience, I've already kind of covered them, but you know, it's not like a crazy sports car. It doesn't surprise you in crazy ways behind the wheel, but it's just good. It's just really good. It's hard to really have any complaints about this thing. If you're looking at a midsize SUV, 3 rows, and you're not looking at this, I think you're making a mistake. And so that's the 2019 Subaru Ascent. I don't normally review family crossovers, but I'm trying to do a good variation of cars, and this is one of the hottest cars on sale today, and with good reason. It's practical, it's roomy, it's nice looking, it's loaded with convenience features, and 19 cup holders means you can carry around about 4 gallons of liquid with you anytime you go anywhere, and that is exactly what today's families need. Anyway, now it's time to give it a Doug score.
Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the Ascent is fine, but a bit normal, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Acceleration does 0 to 60 in 7.3 seconds, which gives it a 1 out of 10. Handling is acceptable, secure enough, but with vague and light steering, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Fun factor is obviously low. This is a mid-size family SUV, and it gets a 1 out of 10. Same with cool factor. You don't buy these to be cool, and again, it gets a 1 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 11 out of 50, among the worst. Then again, it isn't a weekend car, but it is a daily car, and in the daily categories, we'll start with features where it gets a respectable 6 out of 10. Comfort is fine, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Quality is good. The Ascent will undoubtedly be reliable, and everything feels okay to touch, but nothing is especially high quality or upscale, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Practicality is great. With 3 rows, standard all-wheel drive, and lots of available cargo room, it gets a 10 out of 10. Finally, there's value. The Ascent is a lot of car for the money, and it definitely earns its 7 out of 10 for a total daily score of 37 out of 50, among the very best. Added up, and the Doug score is 48 out of 100, and since I don't normally review midsize SUVs, I don't have much to compare it to, but here it is against its 2 closest competitors I've reviewed, the Toyota 4Runner TRD Pro and the Honda Odyssey Elite. It does okay, but mostly I'm just happy that the Ascent doesn't look like the B9 Tribeca.